Overnight, written by James Baxter, read by Samantha Jeffers. The wind blew as the snow drove just outside the glass windows of my store late one night. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed, but tonight felt different. It was a slow night, in the business sense, not many people coming in and out. A lot of the work that usually eludes us on the busier nights was getting done fast. Eventually, after a few stale hours, a sole man walked in the door. He was over 6 feet tall. Of course, the only reason I knew this was because of the tape next to the entrance door. He had a bushy beard and was wearing overalls and a reflective vest. He had to be another snowplow worker, I thought, paying him very little attention. It wasn't until about 5 minutes later I realized that not only had he not gotten a cup of coffee yet on this very cold, snowy night, but he also hadn't made his way to the bathroom down the hall from the coffee island. I went to ask Kathy if she had seen him and saw she was no longer on the sales floor. I wanted to go looking, but saw a few more customers walk in. The bar rush had begun. I took care of the needs of the drunk on a Thursday crowd and started to realize Kathy was nowhere to be found. Orders were piling up on the deli screens and people were getting impatient. So, I made my way into the deli and began pulling double duty. Again. She must be arguing with that asshole she's been dating, I kept thinking. The orders went away one by one, as did the customers, but still no sign of Kathy or the road worker. My mind began to race with different worst-case scenario type situations of where she possibly could have ended up, especially with this odd fellow walking around. It was around 3 in the morning, and my curiosity got the better of me. Being the only one on the sales floor, which is not permitted by company policy, I locked the door after clearing the store of all unnecessary persons as nicely as I could, while still totally freaking out. I checked the break room, which is directly behind the deli. Nothing. Then the dry storage area. Again, nothing. I got to the bathrooms and there still wasn't anything to see. Smell, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. Finally, I came to the cooler door. That's when I saw a flickering light coming from around the corner. Knowing how out of sorts this was, I decided to take a walk into the cooler to not only investigate the flickering light, but to try and solve exactly what happened to the only other people who would presumably be in the store. As I turned the corner, I stepped in what I thought was a spilled soft drink or tea, but I couldn't have been more wrong. It was cold, thick, and slow-moving blood. Startled, I jumped back and let out too feminine of a shriek to comfortably dictate at this time, nor will I admit to it at any later time. After regaining my composure and some of my dignity, I finished turning the corner to see something that to this day haunts me every moment I close my eyes, even when I blink. There they were. She had him hanging upside down like a stuck pig or some other farm animal. The simile is up to you. Holy shit, I uncontrollably said aloud when I saw what exactly was going on in front of me. You weren't supposed to be here for this, Jim, Kathy said, standing in front of the road worker, both covered in his blood. I had so many questions. How did you get him up there? How'd you get the drop on him? How long has this been going on? Yada, yada, yada. My questions for her weren't important now. The next thing I remember, I was waking up on the cooler floor, covered in blood with a massive, and I mean massive, headache. That's when I was brought in. Now here I am, testifying. Somehow you guys think an unconscious, 150-pound, frankly doughy man subdued, hanged, and killed a man nearly 3 times his size. I won't pretend to understand the logic. I honestly believe you just need a scapegoat. You can't catch her. You know less about this sicko than I do. I was her coworker for nearly 4 years. Think of how ridiculous I feel. I honestly don't remember anything else. Needless to say, I won't be going back there. If I ever saw her again, I'd probably be dead too. I'm assuming she isn't a fan of witnesses. But you did see her again, isn't that right? The prosecutor asked. Almost 2 weeks went by before I saw her again. She was walking out of the local big box store as if nothing happened. I assumed she hadn't seen me, so I followed her, all the way home and into her house. Nothing could prepare me for what I saw in there. A lot of plastic, a lot of blood, and a general lack of giving a shit about getting caught. 'Cause I mean, who's gonna look twice at the almost middle-aged housewife who goes grocery shopping? Anyone? I didn't think so. I crept in as the door shut behind her and took cover behind an adjacent wall, that I'm assuming was a living room before she totally lost her mind. She walked into the room whistling as if it were a normal day. I first noticed a boy, couldn't have been older than 9 or 10, hanging upside down, throat slit, dead. Not freshly dead either. He looked like he'd been there a while. The boy's father laid close to him, skull bashed to pieces. Kathy, continuing to whistle, put down her bags of groceries and got to work. Now, I know what you're thinking. Work? What could you mean? What I mean is, she put on some rubber gloves, and then larger gloves over them, waltzed over to the boy, checked his lifeless body, and moved on to the father. She picked up a saw, and, well, you can guess what happened next. After a few minutes of sitting idly by, I couldn't take it anymore. I came out from hiding and charged her. She hit the floor with a hollow yet firm thud, which kind of made sense. I went in to attempt to restrain her when she swung the saw at me, cutting both my arms and face. Quite frankly, it was a good swing. She flailed the saw wildly until I backed away, and when she stood, she said, "Why couldn't you just leave it alone after what happened in the cooler? Why are you here? Why are you here?" That's when she charged me. I didn't know what to do other than try and run away. I took a few steps back and tripped. That's when I noticed the knife on the floor. I grabbed it, held it in front of me, and she charged again. Unfortunately, it only grazed her, which I couldn't believe. It's like missing with a handgun at point-blank range. Such is my luck, as you see. It seems a bit excessive to say she was less than pleased at this point, but she was. I kept trying to scoot my way back until I could stand, but she kept coming at me. Eventually, she hit me with the saw that she was chopping at me with. It stuck right in my left arm, to the bone, or so the doctors tell me. Now, however, she didn't have a weapon in hand, and I still had the knife. So, I did what any sensible young man in my position would do, and screamed like a child while I swung the knife at her, which was quickly knocked out of my hands. With the saw stuck in my arm and a wall not more than 10 feet behind me, I frantically searched for something, anything, to use to defend myself. I turned my head for just a moment, and that's when I felt her boot collide with my skull, once again knocking me out cold. She's got a hell of a kick, as shitty as it is to give that psycho any credit. It took me out. I woke up handcuffed to a radiator with the saw yanked from my arm. By the time I awoke, she had finished her work on the father. I had no idea what was coming next. Still concussed, scared to my core, and bleeding out, I passed back out. I awoke to a bucket of cold water being thrown in my face, and a stiff right hook to my injured arm. There was a man in the house now, cleaning the room of the severed body parts and miscellaneous leftovers of the child and father. He was average height, balding, with a scowl that seemed to rest on his face. With a hoarse voice, I heard him say, "What are we doing with this one?" To which she replied, "He stays." The man smirked and left with a series of garbage bags. It was her and I again. I don't know if it was the blood loss or the confidence that comes from that impending doom feeling, but all I could think to say was, "Is that all you got, bitch? Just gonna have your boyfriend clean me up? Or are you gonna take me down like an adult?" She laughed a sort of laugh that sticks with you. You hear it everywhere, in your dreams, random street sounds, commercials you only half hear in the middle of the night. Not like I've been able to get a moment of sleep since. She unlocked my handcuffs, took a step back, and demanded I stand up. This was not an easy task to accomplish at this point, but eventually, I mustered up the strength to pull it off. There we stood, eye to eye, only a few feet between us. I asked simply and with a shrug, "What now?" She just stared, didn't even blink, and said, "That boy? is up to you. I know this is sounding less and less believable. I'm having trouble believing it actually happened too. I must sound like a jerk-off pitching a movie to someone who's never seen a horror flick before, but I assure you this happened. And this is how it ended. I went to church. I gave it all I could, but I just fell back to the floor, which was responded to with a chorus of laughter that can only be described as hauntingly cruel. Kathy descended on me and began punching the top of my head. It must have bored her quickly because she went and fetched a hammer from across the room to, again, I assume, finish the job. On her way back over, I stretched out my good arm and caught her right ankle and tripped her to the floor, sending the hammer sliding across the floor and narrowly missing my head. I tried as hard as I could to reach the hammer while she crawled at me with the confidence and determination of a lioness stalking down a wounded and defenseless soon-to-be dinner. I couldn't have gotten more than 2 fingers on the hammer when I grasped it as hard as I could and swung. Crunch! The sound of a hammer breaking a skull and popping back out as your nearly lifeless arm gives up the will to move is also something that doesn't exactly leave the short-term memory. Finally, I awoke one last time to find the police entering the house rather violently. Fighting for my life seemed to upset some of the neighbors and passers-by. Make sure to pass on my apologies, by the way. I spent the next few weeks in the ICU at General and made a somewhat full recovery, although I may never get full movement back in my arm. Now I get to go over this story for what feels like the billionth time, and I want it. Scratch that. Need it to be over. I'm done. That's my story. It's what happened. Take from it what you will, but if I can instill one thing in you from all of this, never judge a book by its cover, and never assume anyone is who they say you are. It might get you killed. I'm just lucky I made it out alive. I won't be making that mistake ever again.